Welcome to your monthly market report for October of 2025. My name is Kate Rezebek, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today because we have three really important topics to cover: the Fed, the forecast, and the future. So I'm going to dive right in and share these slides with you because these are going to answer some of the biggest questions that are on your clients' minds right now. First of all, everybody wants to know what's happening with the Fed, what's going on. What does that mean for the forecast, especially for the housing market? And what do we see coming around the corner in the future, those 2026 expectations? So I'm going to start today by kind of just giving you an overview of where we are in the housing market right now. There is a lot going on, and I want to start with what's happening with inventory. You know, the number of homes on the market continues to rise. So this is actually the fifth consecutive month that we've now seen inventory active listings over 1 million. So there's a lot more inventory on the market. That's definitely changing the dynamic. And it's a number we haven't seen since the winter of 2019. Now, you know this. This isn't news to you, but it certainly is something that is changing the housing market. In fact, with more inventory on the market, we're starting to also see a lot more price cuts among sellers. You know, one of the biggest disconnects that sellers have right now is trying to price their house based on their expectations of what happened just a few years ago. And the landscape has truly changed. As there's more inventory, as homes are staying on the market longer, sellers are having to make more price cuts. So being able to share the facts and show them these visuals really helps to level set the real conversations you need to have with your sellers so they can find success in the market. It's the facts that matter so much right now. And with more inventory and with more price reductions on the market, what is that doing to home prices? Well, home prices are starting to moderate much more. So we're starting to see home prices not accelerating like they did just a few years ago. Home prices are still growing nationally, but the pace is a lot smaller. It's a lot less appreciation than what we've seen in years past. So home price growth is moderating. It's still rising nationally, but it's very different from market to market. In fact, this quote right here from Realtor.com says, while national prices continue to climb, local market conditions have become increasingly fragmented. This regional divide is expected to continue influencing price dynamics and sales activity as the fall season gets underway. And that's the bottom line, is it's so different in different pockets of the country, even in different local markets. In fact, if you look at the top 50 metros right now, about half of them are still seeing price increases. You know, we're seeing rising inventory throughout the country, but in those places where prices are still going up, the inventory is still tight. Now, in the other half of the country, we're seeing prices start to decline a little bit. And, you know, when we look at this, we know that some of those markets where prices are coming down more than others are also the ones that had bigger price appreciation several years ago, 60, 70%. So there's a little bit of a correction going on. And when you look at this graph, I don't want you to worry, the bars aren't all going to turn red. In fact, home price appreciation nationally is expected to continue, but we certainly do have kind of this bifurcated market, more so than we've seen in quite some time. And so the bottom line is that inventory is really having a big impact on prices. More reductions, price growth slowing down, and that's just generally the state of the market right now. And so when your clients are hearing all of this, it's confusing. They're not sure what's happening. But one thing I can tell you is that now more than ever, your knowledge is power. And I say that because it's really important that you understand what's happening nationally, locally. You can explain what's most important to your buyers and sellers. And if you're able to do that, that will give you the power in the market. Because on one hand, we have this housing market that looks very different than it did a few years ago. You're very familiar with that right now, but your clients are hearing it. They're not sure what it's mean. And on the other hand, they're hearing this chatter about what's the Fed going to do? What's ahead for the future? What are the forecasts like? And honestly, what they're really wondering is, when are mortgage rates going to come down? And what does this mean for affordability, especially if someone is thinking about buying or selling? So when they're unsure about all these different things, they're unsure about what's happening in the economy, being that expert who can bring the facts and the knowledge and explain it becomes mission critical for your clients and for your business. So I want to talk a little bit about these three things: the Fed, the forecast, and the future. We know where the market is. Now let's talk about what's happening and where it's going. Because I genuinely believe as we go into 2026, there's going to be this slight breeze at our back. All right, the market is sort of making this turn right now, and it's not drastic, but we're definitely seeing some signs of things that might be different coming into the next year. And so let's start with the Fed. You know, everybody's saying, hey, what's the Fed going to do? Well, let's remember the Fed does not set mortgage rates. People want to know what's happening with mortgage rates, but that's not actually what the Fed does. They set the federal funds rate, and that, when they make a move on the federal funds rate, up or down or holding it steady, that's a reflection on the broader economy. And there's several things that they look at to make those decisions. Now, ultimately, what they're trying to do is avoid a recession. And what happens in this process is that mortgage rates tend to respond, whether it's leading up to or just after a Federal Reserve meeting. Mortgage rates in the markets tend to respond to what the Fed is saying about the broader economy. And we know they have what's called a dual mandate. So there's two things that the Fed is responsible for. First is price stability. So they want to make sure that prices aren't rising exponentially like they have in years past. And the second thing is they want to make sure that they have maximum employment. They want to make sure that people have jobs in this country. So they look at a lot of different things to help manage this dual mandate. So let's take a look at the first thing that they're watching. So inflation. And right now, inflation remains slightly elevated. So it's a little bit higher than their goal of 2%, but it is starting to stabilize. We're seeing that stability over time. And so the Fed's keeping their eyes on this for sure. What they're also looking at as they aim for maximum employment is the unemployment rate. Now, unemployment is still holding steady. Again, a little higher than what they're looking for, but it's holding fairly steady. So they're looking at these two different things, trying to decide what their next move is. But there's one other thing that kind of impacts the employment side that I think is kind of rising to the top right now, and it's a bigger issue, and that's that job growth is stalling out. So when you look at this graph right here, you can see in those orange bars that we're not adding as many jobs to the economy right now. So as they're trying to manage this dual mandate of maximum employment, price stability, avoid a recession, they're looking at all of this different data to make those decisions. And the one lever that they have to impact it is the federal funds rate. Now, here's what's going to make this a little bit tricky in the coming weeks. We're recording this at the beginning of October. We're actually in the midst of a government shutdown. Now, we don't know how long this shutdown is going to last. It could be a couple of days. It could be a few weeks. We're not sure. We're going to keep our eyes on it because it means a couple of things for the market. First of all, this data that the Fed is looking at might not be available as it has been in a normal time. So if they're looking for unemployment data that isn't going to be released, they're going to have to look at other factors. Now, it's also, like I said, we don't know how long it's going to last. So it's going to be a challenge, and they're going to have to make decisions based on what they know. Now, the federal shutdown could be over in a matter of moments, but it could impact how these decisions are made if it lasts a little bit longer. The other thing it's going to impact is mortgage rates. How do the markets react? How do the financial markets look at this? And what happens? We don't know how that's going to pan out. We're going to keep our eyes on it. But all of those things are kind of swirling around right now and kind of having an impact on how the Fed's decisions could go forward. This quote from NPR says, "The Fed faces another rate-setting decision in 4 weeks." That's in the end of October. "And policymakers would like to have up-to-date information on hiring and unemployment." So more to come on that. You know, the Fed's decision is going to be a reflection of what happens in the broader economy. And there certainly are impacts to the housing market. We'll get into those in a minute. But what we also know is their impacts on what they're saying, and that impacts how people are feeling. What are they thinking about the economy? What are they thinking right now? And what we know from this survey from LendingTree is that people worry about an upcoming recession. Nearly 2 in 3 Americans think a recession is coming. And so when people are hearing this in the news and they're not sure and it's very confusing, again, your clarity makes a big difference, because when people are concerned about a recession, they're not going to make big purchases. They're not going to be purchasing a home. They're not going to be buying a car. There's a lot of things that they're going to put on hold if they're unsure. And 74% of Americans admit that world news or current events are affecting their decision. So really important to be able to step in and clarify for your clients what this truly means, how it impacts the market, how it impacts their decisions. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, people want to know, are mortgage rates going to come down? If they're thinking of buying or selling, that is top of mind for them right now. Now, the Fed's expected to make a couple more cuts this year, maybe some early next year. Again, we're going to continue watching that, but all of that is a reflection on what's happening with the economy. Now, with people having all of these questions on their mind, what's happening with the economy, what's going on, like I said, one of the biggest things they want to know, especially in this industry, is what does that mean for mortgage rates? Does that mean that it's going to get more affordable to buy a home? When are mortgage rates going to come down? So let's talk about what we see for the forecast. This is a look at mortgage rate projections going out to the end of next year. Now, what we can see is that some of the top forecasters are saying that mortgage rates should end the end of 2026, somewhere in that low 6% range. Fannie Mae is already saying potentially 5.9. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to happen between now and then. But based on what we're seeing in the data right now, what's happening in the economy, how the markets tend to react, we anticipate that mortgage rates are going to come down slightly going into next year. Now, again, this is part of that slight breeze at our back as we head into 2026. And it's really important for you to be able to explain this to your clients, to show them what we anticipate is happening again or coming up ahead. And, you know, in September, we saw the Fed start their rate cutting cycle. So their cycle of making potentially several cuts to the federal funds rate. And what we saw leading up to that was the market, or the financial market, saying, okay, we see this cut coming. We know this is happening. It's a reflection in the economy. And mortgage rates actually started to go down ahead of that rate cutting cycle beginning. Now, after that, they went up a little bit. There's going to be some volatility. It's not always the Fed cuts rates and mortgage rates come down. But as they start this potential rate cutting cycle, forecasters are looking at that. They're looking at what's happening in the economy. Markets are reacting, and we're anticipating that mortgage rates should ease in the coming year. So that's definitely going to be something that bodes well for the housing market. It's something we're continuing to watch. And a lot of your clients are probably wondering, so how does that happen? How does this work? So let me show you something to watch as to a good indicator, a commonly watched indicator for where mortgage rates are headed. And that is the 10-year Treasury. Because for over 50 years, the 30-year mortgage rate has moved in unison with the 10-year Treasury. What does that mean? When the 10-year Treasury goes up, mortgage rates tend to follow. When it comes down, mortgage rates tend to come down as well. And the average spread between those two benchmarks is generally about 176 basis points, or 1.76%. And so that's been the typical average for over 50 years of this symbiotic relationship. So let's zoom in and take a look at what's been happening over the past few years. This is kind of a closer look of the beginning of 2023 all the way to today. And what we can see is that gap between the 10-year Treasury and mortgage rate has started to narrow. So not back to that normal 176 basis points, but closer to 260. And so as it started to come together, we often look at that as what's considered like a measurement of fear in the market. So as clarity starts to come about, as the path ahead becomes clearer, that spread starts to narrow. And what happens at that point is that mortgage rates tend to respond, mortgage rates tend to come down. And that's exactly what we've seen over the past few weeks as well. So as the spread gets narrower, we can anticipate that this is going to be good for mortgage rates potentially coming down, certainly good for affordability. And what do we know going forward? Is that spread is expected to narrow even more. So how do we figure out how this works together? Well, what determines the mortgage rate? Basically, if you take the Treasury yield, the 10-year yield, that's the blue bar on this graph, and you add the spread on top of it, you get the general mortgage rate. And as I said, that spread is supposed to come down a little bit coming into the next year. Now, we don't know how much it's expected to come down, but the forecast says a gradual decline. And again, this can all change as the economic data and the reflection in the economy starts to shift. But based on what we know right now, that spread or that 10-year Treasury is supposed to come down, which could narrow the spread. Now, let's play this out for a second. Imagine that the spread were going back to normal, right? If you look at where mortgage rates would be if the spread were normal, that's on the right side of your screen. You take the 10-year Treasury yield, you add the typical 176 basis points, you get mortgage rates that are closer to 6%. So I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to take some time for all of this impact to unfold. And we might not get back to exactly normal. But as we anticipate the 10-year coming down, that measure of fear kind of closing a little bit, the path ahead becoming more certain, mortgage rates should respond. So that's really good news for the housing market. It's really good news for what's ahead for the economy. And as we think about how that impacts housing, this quote from One Real Mortgage says, with expectations growing for a rate cut at the Fed's next meeting, this could be just the beginning of a stronger housing market heading into fall. You know, we definitely saw a bit of a stronger market as rates came down a bit in September. We saw demand pick up. We saw purchase applications pick up. So we know that when rates come down, activity rises. In fact, I think this graph really shows it very, very well that lower rates equal stronger buyer demand. So if you break this down, you can see that white line across your screen. That's the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate. And over the past year, it's kind of hovered in this limited demand zone. Buyers were putting their plans on pause. They weren't sure. They were sitting and waiting for rates to fall, waiting for affordability to improve. And what we saw in end of August, early September, when rates came down, is that buyer demand kind of kicked into that good range, a little bit better. So not massive demand, but certainly we saw activity increase. I talked to so many agents and industry leaders who have been following along with this, and they're like, yeah, we're definitely feeling some momentum pick up as mortgage rates come down. So that's a really, really good thing. As we look into next year, demand should pick up. As demand picks up, we're going to see more transactions. And what does that mean potentially for home prices? Well, this is a look at the U.S. Home Price Expectations Survey. It's a survey of about 100 economists, industry leaders who look at the data and project out what they think home prices are going to look like over the next 5 years. And what you can see is they break it into 3 categories. So those 3 colored lines over on the right, the optimists are saying home prices could rise nationally by about 25% over the next 5 years. Now, the average is closer to 15%, so probably more in that 15% range. But what's interesting to me when I look at this is even the pessimists, the people who are on the much lower end of the scale when it comes to home price projections, are saying growth over the next 5 years. Much more moderate, much more sustainable, much healthier pace for the market than we saw a few years ago. But that's definitely a good sign for the stability of the housing market and what we see going forward. So with home price growth expected to continue, with mortgage rates expected to go down, what does that mean for home sales? Well, this is a look at the forecast for home sales in 2025 and 2026. This year, we're expected to end at about 4.8 million total home sales. So that's existing plus new homes. And next year, it's expected to tick up a little bit more to 5.2 million. Now, that's not a huge jump, but it is part of that breeze at our back. There should be more transactions. We have more inventory. We have buyer demand expected to pick up, easing mortgage rates, improved affordability as home prices moderate. All those different things swirling together should lead to more transactions next year. And anytime I share this graph, I love to ask agents, so if you anticipate more transactions next year, how many of those are going to be yours? That's the big question, because it's truly the work that you put in now that's going to set up your success for 2026. And we know that the agents who are having the most conversations are the ones closing more deals. So the conversations you start today set the stage for your success in 2026. The more of this knowledge, information that you can share, that is truly your superpower going into next year, because it's really about building trust, building confidence, helping your clients, your database, people who are there that are confused, understand what's happening so they can make powerful and confident decisions. So they understand the data, they understand what it means for them, they understand what they can expect going forward. And that's where you can absolutely grab more market share going into next year. Certainly don't want to be waiting for next year, waiting for people to feel better about buying a home. You want to be having those conversations now, so when they are ready, they turn to you. And I want to give you one fantastic example of an agent who has found real results and real success by having conversations now, because this is fantastic right here. So we spoke with an agent about a week ago who follows along with KCM. And what she did is she grabbed one of our graphics that showed how affordability was improving. As mortgage rates are starting to come down, prices moderating, we have this graphic that we put out. She grabbed this and then went ahead and texted it out to 40 of the people in her database. Now, these were people who had pressed pause. They were silently in there. They had told her at one point or another, we're just not ready. We're waiting for the right time. We can't find a home. It's too expensive. We want rates to come down. Prices are getting out of control. Whatever it was, she had 40 potential clients in her database. And she took 5 minutes to text this image out to those 40 different people. Now, the results are stunning. So from the 5 minutes of text that she sent, she got 18 conversations. That's almost 50% of the people that she reached out to wrote back and said, well, that's interesting. I'd like to know more. And so she was able to start 18 conversations about how affordability is improving and how she can help. From those conversations, she was able to set up appointments with 7 different clients. So they said, yes, let's keep this conversation going. They wanted to learn more. So what she did is she started showing them houses and doing her buyer's appointment, all of those different things to then move them through the process. And within 1 week, she had a contract signed. Now, that's one, and I say so far because I would put a lot of money on the fact that she's probably got a few more contracts since then. So starting these conversations, really, really important. Have them now. Some of those people in your pipeline you have conversations with now, they're not ready yet. That's okay. But you're staying top of mind. You're providing value and you're sharing the data and the knowledge that you know is absolute gold in this market. So I challenge you to do that. Tell us what your results are when you go out there. Text any of these slides, these visuals we went over today. Grab something in the member area as a KCM member that you want to share, because the conversations you have now are what will set you up for 2026 and that breeze that's coming to push the market in the right direction. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this thought. Remember, this is why we do this, because most agents know what's happening. Good agents understand what's happening, but only great agents can explain what's happening. And I hope I was able to give you the visuals, the tools, the resources, the stories, the insights, everything you need to have success and be able to explain this going into 2026. Thank you so much. It was great to see you, and we'll be back again next month with your monthly market report.